A very rich man took his secretary to a fancy dinner. What she did shocked everyone. Before we start, comment below which city you're watching from. Enjoy the story. James Cooper, the head of Cooper International, was about to face one of the most important nights of his career. The international company was valued at billions. He was about to face one of the most important nights of his career. The company, which was valued in billions, was sinking in scandals about abusive working conditions and unethical practices. Investors were fleeing. The press wouldn't stop exposing his lack of empathy. That night's gala dinner was his only chance to save the company that he needed to convince key investors to believe in his leadership again. For that, every detail had to be sinking in scandals about abusive working conditions and unethical practices. Investors were fleeing. The press wouldn't stop exposing his lack of empathy. That night's gala dinner was his only chance to save the company. He needed to convince key investors to believe in his leadership again. For that, every detail had to be impeccable. Mr. Cooper. His assistant interrupted his thoughts. We have a problem. Megan cancelled. James looked up from his computer. What do you mean? She cancelled. Family emergency. She's not going to the dinner. James felt the blood rush to his head. Megan was my ideal choice. Charming. Experienced. Someone who conveyed the image. Mr. Cooper. Greg, his assistant, interrupted his thoughts. We have a problem. Megan cancelled. James looked up from his computer. What do you mean? She cancelled. Family emergency. She's not going to the dinner. James felt the blood rush to his head. Megan was my ideal choice. Charming. Experienced. Someone who conveyed the image of success I needed. So, what do you suggest? Greg? We don't have time to find someone else. Greg hesitated before suggesting. Maybe someone from the team. James scoffed. The idea seemed absurd. With the clock ticking, he looked out the window. In the lobby, he saw Emma Taylor, the receptionist. She was talking to a delivery person. Greg was determined to find success. What do you suggest? Emma? We don't have time to find someone else. Maybe someone from the team. James scoffed. The idea seemed absurd. With time running out, he looked out the window. In the lobby, he saw Emma Taylor, the receptionist. She was talking to a delivery person. She had a calm posture as she organized packages. Something about her caught his attention, simplicity and discreet elegance. She could be useful. Bring her here now. A few minutes later, Emma walked into the office, trying to hide her nervousness. She had never spoken directly to the CEO before. Mr. Cooper, she said politely but cautiously. James looked at her for a moment, as if he were evaluating a product. I need you to come with me to a fancy dinner tonight. It's an important event for investors. Your only job will be to smile. Be nice. Above all, not say anything unnecessary. Understood. Emma was surprised. The proposal seemed more like an order. She wasn't paid for. She stood with a firm but calm posture, organizing packages. He noticed her simplicity and discreet elegance. She could be useful. Bring her here now. A few minutes later, Emma walked into the office, trying to hide her nervousness. She had never spoken directly to the CEO before. Mr. Cooper. She said politely but cautiously. This could be an opportunity. Yes. Sir. She replied firmly. Even though she didn't know what she was getting into. James nodded to Greg. Ending the conversation. Make sure she looks presentable. Something sophisticated. We meet at 7 p.m. Don't be late. At 7 p.m. Emma was ready. She wore an elegant dark blue dress that she stood up straight and calm. He noticed something about her. She was simple and elegant. She could be useful. Bring her here now. A few minutes later. Emma walked into the office. Trying not to show her nervousness. She had never spoken directly to the CEO before. Mr. Cooper. She said politely but cautiously. She stood up straight. She still felt out of place. James. Waiting impatiently in the car. Nodded in approval when he saw her. You learn to follow orders quickly. Let's go. On the way. The silence was heavy. Emma tried to understand why she had been chosen while James mentally reviewed the points he needed to present. She stood there. Tall and confident. With a firm but calm posture. He noticed her simple, elegant style and thought she could be useful. He invited her to come to his office. A few minutes later. Emma walked into the office. Trying not to show her nervousness. She had never spoken directly to the CEO before. To the investors. She said politely but cautiously. To the investors. I'm here to represent the company. Not myself. I'm here to be professional. Nothing more. Emma didn't respond. Inside she knew this was her chance to prove she was more than just a receptionist. As they walked through the fancy doors. Emma felt the eyes of dozens of investors on her. She knew that night would be a turning point for James Cooper International. And, most importantly, herself. The halls of the Grand Plaza Hotel were filled with luxury. Sparkling chandeliers lit up the guests' dresses and impeccable suits, showing off their power and influence. Upon entering, James Cooper projected she organized packages with a firm but calm posture. Something about her caught his attention, simplicity and discreet elegance. She could be useful. Bring her here now. A few minutes later. Emma walked into the office. Trying to hide her nervousness. She had never spoken directly to the CEO before. Mr. Cooper. She said politely but cautiously. His typical cold confidence. Beside him. Emma Taylor. Though visibly nervous. Held her head high with impeccable posture. As they crossed the doors. Curious eyes fell on them. Who was the woman beside the powerful CEO? Many assumed she was a hired companion. Emma noticed the silent judgment. Chose to ignore it. Don't leave my. She stood up straight and calm when she organized the packages. He noticed how simple and elegant she was. She could be useful. Bring her here now. A few minutes later. Emma walked into the office. Trying not to show her nervousness. She had never spoken directly to the CEO before. Mr. Cooper. She said politely but cautiously. Sighed. James murmured. Not even looking at her. Of course. Sir. Emma replied. Keeping a professional tone. Though her determination was growing. Soon. A group of influential investors approached. Led by Oliver Hayes. A magnate known for his critical stance and progressive vision. James greeted him with a firm handshake. Oliver gave as she stood there. Calm but firm. He noticed her. She was simple and elegant. She could be useful. Bring her here now. A few minutes later, Emma walked into the office, trying not to show her nervousness. She had never spoken directly to the CEO before. Mr. Cooper, she said politely but cautiously. Curious look at Emma. Who might this young lady be? Oliver asked, smiling politely but with a tone indicating curiosity. Before James could intervene, Emma confidently replied. Emma Taylor. I work at Cooper International. James frowned but remained silent. Interesting, Oliver seemed genuinely intrigued. And what do you think of the current situation of the company? Emma felt the weight of the question. It was the kind of question that could be a trap. She realized it was also an opportunity. I believe every company faces challenges. She began, choosing her words carefully. But I see potential for real changes. Especially when the focus includes human resources. Impact. The group was silent for a moment, surprised by her response. James pursed his lips, dizzy and uncomfortable. As the night progressed, the investors began discussing social responsibility practices. James, true to his calculated approach, spoke in terms of profits and numbers. But Oliver, clearly dissatisfied, turned to Emma again. Miss Taylor, since you work at the company, what's your opinion on how we can regain public trust? Emma noticed James's discomfort. She knew answering could upset him. She also knew this was her chance to regain trust. It takes more than marketing strategies, Emma said, looking directly at Oliver. It's necessary to listen to people. Employees and customers understand their stories and take action. This improves their reputation and creates a genuine connection with the public. The silence that followed was broken by a short laugh from Oliver. Finally, someone with an interesting perspective. The other investors began murmuring among themselves, seemingly in agreement. James, now clearly irritated, tried to regain control of the conversation. Emma isn't familiar with the challenges of large-scale businesses, scale leadership. She's here to watch. Of course. Oliver smiled but didn't give in. Sometimes we need a new point of view. James. By the end of dinner, Emma had everyone's attention. Several investors spoke with her, praising her clarity and courage. James, however, barely said a word to her on the way back to the car. When they finally got in the vehicle, he broke the silence. You completely ignored my instructions. Emma turned to him, staying calm. I just answered questions. I didn't do anything wrong. James gripped the steering wheel. Visibly. You were frustrated. You attracted attention that you didn't need. That's not okay. She didn't respond. Deep down, she knew she had gone too far. She also knew she had impressed the right people. Emma looked out the window as the car drove through the brightly lit city. She felt sure that that night would change everything. Better or worse. The next morning, the atmosphere at Cooper International's office was more tense than ever. Emma arrived on time. The excitement in the hallways showed that the conversations from the previous night's dinner had spread. Some people looked at her with curiosity. Others with approving smiles. Emma knew the only opinion that mattered at that moment was James Cooper's. At 9 a.m., a message arrived on her computer. Emma. In my office now. James. She took a deep breath before standing up and walking to the CEO's office. The door was slightly ajar. James stood looking out the window with his hands in his pockets. His tone was cold and direct as she entered. "Sit down." Emma complied, remaining calm. "You disobeyed my orders last night. I told you to be discreet. Not only did you ignore that, you also became the center of attention." She frowned but responded firmly. "I answered the questions I was asked. I did nothing wrong. Mr. Cooper." He turned to face her. His expression blank. "It's not your place to decide what is or isn't wrong in this situation. Your job was to accompany me, not to share your opinions." Emma felt anger bubbling up. She held it back. "If my answers helped improve the company's image with the investors, then I played a positive role." James tapped the desk lightly, signaling the end of the conversation. "You don't understand. I can't afford more distractions. You're fired." The word hit like a bomb. Even though Emma had anticipated this. Hearing it, she was still angry. Instead of protesting, she stood up and stayed calm. She understood that her voice was calm. Her eyes showed that she was strong. Without saying more, Emma left the office that afternoon while packing her things. Her phone rang. She almost ignored it. When she saw the number she didn't recognize, she answered. "Ms. Taylor, this is Oliver Hayes. Could we meet for coffee? There's something I'd like to discuss with you." Oliver was one of the investors she had spoken with the previous night. Intrigued, Emma agreed. An hour later, they were seated in a nearby cafe. "I'll get straight to the point." Emma Oliver crossed her arms. "Cooper International needs new leadership, especially in its European division. I was impressed with what you said last night. I believe you have what it takes for a significant role there." Emma blinked in surprise. "Are you offering me a job?" "I'm offering you the position of CEO of the European division. The board will need to approve it. I trust that will just be a formality." She hesitated for a moment. The offer was great. Almost unbelievable. After being underestimated for so long, the chance to lead something impactful was irresistible. "I accept," she said with determination. 2 days later, James Cooper received news that made him angry. Oliver Hayes had nominated Emma Taylor as CEO of the European division. The board had quickly approved. This meant that, even though Emma was technically lower in rank than the general board, she now had an equal level of influence over corporate decisions. Let's play a game with those who only read the comments. Type McDonald's in the comments. Only those who read this will understand. Now, let's continue the story. When James learned he would have to attend a meeting led by Emma was supposed to make sure the new rules were followed in all departments, he was annoyed. He knew he would have to deal with her again. This time she would have as much power as he did. The meeting was set at Cooper International's headquarters. Emma arrived feeling confident. She was dressed nicely and had organized the documents for the presentation. When she entered the conference room, she found James already seated with other executives. "Miss Taylor," he said with a fake smile. "Or should I say CEO Taylor?" "Just Emma is fine, Mr. Cooper replied calmly before starting her presentation. During the meeting, Emma explained her plans to make the company's practices more ethical and transparent. Some executives liked her ideas. Others, including James, did not. At the end of the meeting, James approached Emma in private. He said that Emma's presentation was impressive. That it would be difficult to implement her ideas. Emma didn't agree. During the meeting, Emma clearly expressed her ideas and showed that she was a good leader. She explained her plans to make the company's actions more ethical and clear. Some executives liked her ideas. Others, like James, did not. At the end of the meeting, James spoke to her privately. "Your presentation was impressive," he said, sounding a little ironic. "But I know it won't be easy to put these ideas into action." Emma didn't take this lying down. "I never expected it to be easy. I know how to deal with problems." Mr. Cooper and Emma looked at each other for a moment. The air was full of tension. It was clear that neither was willing to give in. Both felt a strange mix of respect and provocation. As Emma left the room, James realized that dealing with her would be much more complicated than he had anticipated. But at the same time, he couldn't shake the back down. "I never expected it to be easy. I know how to deal with obstacles, Mr. Cooper." The two stared at each other for a moment. The air was filled with tension. It was clear that neither was willing to give in. Both felt a strange mix of respect and provocation. As Emma left the room, James realized that dealing with her would be much more complicated than he had anticipated. At the same time, he couldn't shake the determination in her eyes. Emma Taylor knew that taking on the role of CEO of Cooper International's European division was just the beginning of a bigger challenge. She was aware that James Cooper wouldn't make her journey easy and that internal resistance would be constant. But her determination to bring about change and prove her worth was stronger than any obstacle. On the other hand, James closely watched Emma Taylor knew that taking on the role of CEO of Cooper International's European division was just the beginning of a bigger challenge. She was aware that James Cooper wouldn't make her journey easy and that internal resistance would be constant. Her determination to bring about change and prove her worth was stronger than any obstacle. On the other hand, James closely watched Emma's moves. He couldn't decide if he admired her courage or saw her as a direct threat to his authority. A confrontation between the two seemed inevitable. A week after the introductory meeting, Emma called for a new video conference with the division executives, including James. The goal was to discuss the plan to align all units with a new corporate conduct code focused on social responsibility and transparency. True to his style, he couldn't decide if he admired her courage or saw her as a direct threat to his authority. A confrontation between the two seemed inevitable. A week after the introductory meeting, Emma called for a new video conference with the division executives, including James. The goal was to discuss the plan to align all units with a new corporate conduct code focused on social responsibility and transparency. True to his style, James joined the meeting late, adjusting his tie as if the delay were intentional. As he sat down, Emma began her presentation, explaining how the new code would be implemented. "This will require significant changes in the division's culture. I believe it's essential to regain public trust and increase our talent retention," Emma said calmly. James crossed his arms, waiting for his turn to speak. When Emma opened the floor, James joined the meeting late, adjusting his tie as if the delay were intentional. As he sat down, Emma began her presentation, explaining how the new code would be implemented. "This will require significant changes in the division's culture. I believe it's essential to regain public trust and increase our talent retention," Emma said calmly. James crossed his arms, waiting for his turn to speak. When Emma opened the floor for questions, he was the first to speak up. This sounds very idealistic. Emma. He began, his tone heavy with sarcasm. But have you considered how this will affect operational costs? The last thing we need right now is to compromise our budget with initiatives that, frankly, might not bring returns. Emma kept her composure. There was a defiant gleam in her eyes. I believe numbers are just part of the problem. Mr. Cooper. Our biggest. James joined the meeting late, adjusting his tie as if the delay were intentional. As he sat down, Emma began her presentation, explaining how the new code would be implemented. This will require significant changes in the division's culture. I believe it's essential to regain public trust and increase our talent retention. Emma said calmly. James crossed his arms, waiting for his turn to speak. When Emma opened the floor for questions, the cost right now is the negative impact on the company's reputation. Every cent invested in transparency will be recouped by market trust and the retention of qualified talent. Other executives murmured in approval. James realized he was losing ground. When Emma detailed the practical steps of the new code, including audits and all divisions, James interrupted again. Internal audits, he said. It sounds like we're preparing to dig more. James crossed his arms, waiting for his turn to speak. We have more problems than we can solve. We've been creating these problems for years. Mr. Cooper. Pretending they don't exist won't make them disappear. The tension in the room was clear. Other executives looked between the two, clearly divided. At the end of the meeting, Emma said, I understand that changes are uncomfortable. If we want to survive in the current market, we need to go beyond immediate profit. This is a long. James joined the meeting late, adjusting his tie as if the delay were intentional. As he sat down, Emma began her presentation, explaining how the new code would be implemented. This would require significant changes in the division's culture. I believe it's essential to regain public trust and increase our talent retention. Emma said calmly. James crossed his arms, waiting for his turn to speak. When Emma opened the floor for comments, James remained silent. His expression made it clear that the battle was far from over. After the meeting, James waited for Emma in the hallway. When she exited the room, he intercepted her. Do you really think you can give me orders? He said, crossing his arms. Emma stopped evaluating him for a moment before responding. I'm not giving orders, Mr. Cooper. I'm proposing changes that benefit the company as a whole. James joined the meeting late, adjusting his tie as if the delay were intentional. As he sat down, Emma began her presentation, explaining how the new code would be implemented. This will require significant changes in the division's culture. I believe it's essential to regain public trust and increase our talent retention. Emma said calmly. James crossed his arms, waiting for his turn to speak. When Emma opened the floor, James stepped forward, closing the distance between them. Careful, Emma. You're treading on dangerous ground. Don't underestimate me. James. I've been fired before for speaking my mind. But that didn't stop me from getting to where I am now. If you think you can intimidate me, you're underestimating the wrong person. Emma held her ground, refusing to back down. James. I've been fired before for speaking my mind. Person. A moment. Silence hung between them as they locked eyes. There was more than just professional tension in the air. James felt a mix of frustration and admiration for her courage. While Emma sensed that behind James' arrogance was someone afraid of losing control. In the days that followed, the tension between Emma and James was palpable to everyone around them. While Emma focused on implementing changes in the European branch, James used his influence to slow down some of the processes. Despite the challenges, Emma began gaining the support of other executives. Her straightforward approach and ability to listen to suggestions made her an approachable leader, in stark contrast to James's authoritarian style. By the end of the week, Emma received a notification that James had called a board meeting without informing her. She knew he was plotting something. She also knew she was ready to face him again. While looking over her documents for the upcoming meeting, she had one thought: if James thinks he can defeat me, he's about to learn a lesson. Emma learned about James Cooper's unscheduled meeting while she was at her desk. Emma was working on the timeline for implementing the new code of conduct. She understood that James wouldn't act openly against her without a clear motive. She suspected he was planning something to weaken her position. The next day, Emma arrived early to the conference room, determined to counter any attack. As the board members began filing in, she maintained a steady demeanor. Even when James entered with a self-tuning the timeline for implementing the new code of conduct, she understood that James wouldn't act openly against her without a clear motive. She suspected he was planning something to weaken her position. The next day, Emma arrived early to the conference room, determined to counter any attack. As the board members began filing in, she maintained a steady demeanor. Even when James entered with a self-satisfied smile. "Good morning, everyone. I've called this meeting to address some concerns about the financial impact of the new policies we're implementing." Emma took a deep breath. She recognized this as an attempt to discredit her. James presented graphs and charts highlighting potential costs associated with the audits and changes Emma had proposed. He used words like impractical and risky, painting a picture of looming chaos. When he finished, all eyes turned to Emma. She calmly stood, picked up a marker, walked to the whiteboard. "Let's talk about real costs." She began drawing a line on the board. On the left side, she listed the financial losses from lawsuits, reputational damage, employee turnover over the past 3 years. On the right side, she listed the estimated costs to implement the changes that were proposed. She turned to face the executives, holding the marker firmly. "Now, let's be honest. Which of these costs seems more sustainable in the long run?" A hush fell over the room, interrupted only by murmurs of approval. Emma seized the moment. Ignoring these issues is not a viable solution. Strategy. We need to deal with these issues now. We risk losing credibility and opportunities. As Emma spoke, several executives began to agree with her, including Robert McCain, a senior member of the board. The first time in months, he said, "Emma's right. We've ignored these problems for too long. We need a more responsible approach." James tried to intervene. Robert's influence was strong. Others started siding with Emma. By the meeting's end, it was clear that James had lost most of the support. However, he showed he didn't seem frustrated. Instead, he looked at Emma in a deliberate way before leaving the room, as if he were already planning his next step. In the weeks that followed, James started working behind the scenes. He got support from other people in the company and delayed budget approvals for projects that Emma was leading. He said this was just a financial move. Emma knew it was an attempt to mess up her work. Emma didn't give up. She found ways to get around the delays. Asking the board for help directly. Looking for other options to keep her projects moving along. Each obstacle James threw at her only seemed to make her more determined. During a weekly meeting, the tension between them reached a peak. Emma was presenting early results from a pilot audit at one of the European branches, showing a significant increase in employee satisfaction. James interrupted. "What about the impact on profits? Are you intentionally leaving that out?" Emma met his gaze, keeping her voice steady. "I'm presenting measurable human impact. Financial numbers will be in the quarterly report. As they always are." "How convenient," James replied, sounding sarcastic. Emma took a deep breath. "What's convenient?" "Mr. Cooper," she asked, "is using financial objections as an excuse to avoid necessary changes?" The room went silent. Once again, Emma's strength impressed those present. The rift between her and James grew deeper. Their rivalry extended beyond the workplace. During a corporate event, they were both invited to speak on the same leadership panel. James seized the opportunity to subtly criticize Emma's leadership style. "Leadership is about firmness and clarity," he said. "You can't always make everyone happy. Sometimes you have to make hard decisions." When it was Emma's turn, she spoke calmly but firmly. "Leadership also means being able to adapt and be empathetic. The best leaders don't ignore the changes around them, they accept them and use them to their advantage." The audience noticed the tension between them and was captivated by their dynamic. Despite their constant disagreements, something unexpected began to emerge. Beneath the provocations and confrontations, there was a growing respect. Emma acknowledged James's strategic mind. He admired her determination and vision. In quieter moments, they exchanged glances, hinting at something deeper. Neither was ready to admit it. One evening, James was thinking about Emma in his office. He felt unsettled. At the same time, Emma realized that her view of James was beginning to change. The weeks ahead were marked by tense encounters and meaningful moments between them. Though the conflicts remained intense, they both started to feel a connection they couldn't ignore. Everything changed when an urgent business trip arose to deal with important issues at a European branch. As the most important people involved, Emma and James were told to travel together. The long flight began with no one saying anything. Emma looked at documents while James, sitting next to her, looked out the window and thought deeply. He was ready to deal with the difficult questions. Finally, James said something. His tone was teasing. "I'm always ready," Emma replied without looking up from her papers. He smiled a little, surprised by her quick response. But during the trip, even though they looked at each other a few times and brief comments, the tension between them seemed different. There was less hostility and more curiosity. When they arrived at the branch, an important meeting with local leaders revealed an unexpected problem. Productivity numbers were below expectations. The managers claimed that Emma's proposed changes had generated resistance among the employees. James, true to his direct style, wasted no time pointing this out. "I warned you that drastic changes could cause resistance, Emma. Now we are dealing with the consequences." She didn't back down. "It's not the change that's causing this, James, it's the lack of communication. We need to listen to what the employees are saying. Determined to find a solution, Emma organized a meeting with the branch workers. James reluctantly decided to go with her. At first, the meeting was tense. As the employees started to speak, it became clear that many felt disconnected from the leadership and feared the new policies. Emma took the lead, listening carefully and suggesting changes that balanced the workers' needs with the company's goals. James was impressed by her ability to mediate the conflict and create a collaborative environment. After the meeting, Emma and James went to dinner at a local restaurant. The atmosphere was cozy, with the soft lighting and quiet music made it so that for the first time, their conversation was not filled with sarcasm or insults. "You were impressive today," James said after a few minutes of silence. Emma looked at him, surprised that he was being so kind. "I didn't know you were capable of complimenting someone," she said. He smiled a little embarrassed. Neither. The soft lighting and quiet music made it easy for them to talk without arguing. "You were impressive today," James said after a few minutes of silence. Emma looked at him, surprised by how honest he was being. "I didn't know you could compliment someone," she said. He smiled a little embarrassed. "Neither did I," he said. "But I need to admit it when I see something exceptional." Emma relaxed a bit, feeling more at ease. "You know, James, sometimes you surprise me. When you're not trying to challenge me, you seem almost human." They both laughed. The tension between them gave way to something lighter. However, they both knew that this moment Emma relaxed a bit, feeling more at ease. "You know, James, sometimes you surprise me. When you're not trying to challenge me, you seem almost human." They both laughed. The tension between them gave way to something lighter. However, they both knew that this moment had a greater significance than they were willing to admit. The next day, a technical problem at the branch forced Emma and James to work late. When they finally finished, a storm left them stranded in the building with no available transportation. While waiting for the rain to let up, they sat in the branch's small lounge, drinking coffee and talking. For the first time, Emma saw a more vulnerable side of James, who talked about the pressures he faced as CEO and the sacrifices he had made to get where he was. "Sometimes I feel like everything I've built is meaningless," he confessed, looking at the cup in his hands. "Maybe the problem is what you..." Emma relaxed a bit, feeling more at ease. "You know, James, sometimes you surprise me. When you're not trying to challenge me, you seem almost human." They both laughed. The tension between them gave way to something lighter. However, they both knew that this moment chose to value. Emma replied gently. He looked at her, surprised by the depth of her words. "And you, Emma? Why are you still here facing all this?" "I believe I can make a difference. Despite everything. I believe you can too." As the rain continued, they sat in silence. The closeness between them felt more intense. When their eyes met for a moment, time seemed to stand still. James was the first to look away. The impact of that moment stayed with him for the rest of the night. Something inside him had changed. He knew it wouldn't be easy to ignore. In the following days, James and Emma worked together. Emma relaxed a bit, feeling more at ease. "You know, James, sometimes you surprise me. When you're not trying to challenge me, you seem almost human." They both laughed. The tension between them gave way to something lighter. However, They both knew that this moment would solve the branch's problems. Their partnership began to flow surprisingly efficiently. Although they still exchanged occasional provocations, there was a growing complicity. One evening, after another successful meeting, James walked her to the hotel. When they stopped at the door, he hesitated before saying, "Emma, I need to admit something." She looked at him, intrigued. "What is it?" "You make me question a lot of things about myself and how I've been running my life." Emma was silent. Her gaze said more than any words. "Maybe that's not a bad thing, James." As Emma entered the hotel, James stood at the door, watching her disappear down the hall. He knew he was falling in love. He wasn't sure if he was ready to admit it to her or to himself. Back at Cooper International's headquarters, James Cooper felt restless. Since the trip to the European branch, his relationship with Emma Taylor had undeniably changed. The constant teasing and competition had given way to moments of mutual admiration. James could no longer ignore what he felt for her. The problem was that admitting these feelings meant giving up the control he valued so much. Emma, on the other hand, also felt that something was different. Although she tried to keep their interactions strictly professional, she thought about the good times they had together on the trip. She knew she was starting to see James in a new way. Not just as a boss. After they got back, they met. The tension between them reached a peak. Emma presented a new project. It was about making it easier for employees to understand what was going on. The project would require a lot of money for new training programs and benefits. James waited until she finished talking. Then he said he didn't agree. "Emma, this is ambitious. You're ignoring the financial impact. We're dealing with a slow recovery. Adding more costs now isn't feasible." Emma stayed calm. "James, we've already shown that investing in employees increases productivity and reduces turnover. It's not a cost, it's a smart investment." "Strategic?" James retorted, his tone dripping with sarcasm. "It seems more like a risky bet that could push us further into the red." Emma felt the heat rising. Emma remained calm. "James, we've already proven that investing in employees increases productivity and reduces turnover. It's not a cost, it's a strategic investment." "Strategic?" James retorted, his tone dripping with sarcasm. "It seems more like a risky bet that could push us further into the red." Emma felt the heat rising. She responded firmly. "So, what do you suggest? Continuing on the same path that got us into this situation in the first place?" Silence filled the room as the other executives watched the intense exchange. James finally sighed and shook his head. "Do as you wish. Don't say I didn't warn you." After the meeting, Emma decided to confront him directly in his office, entering without knocking. She found James sitting at his desk, staring at a report he clearly wasn't reading. "Can we talk?" she asked, crossing her arms. That he looked up, surprised, gestured for her to come in. "What is it now?" Emma took a deep breath before responding. "Why are you making things more difficult than they need to be? Why are you making things so difficult? You know what I'm proposing is best for the company." James set the report aside and stared at her. "Maybe because you make me feel like I'm losing control." The words came out before he could stop them. The shock on Emma's face was evident. "What do you mean by that?" she asked hesitantly. James stood up and walked away. "It's so hard. I think what I'm suggesting is best for the company." James put the report down and looked at her. "Maybe because you make me feel like I'm losing control." The words came out before he could stop them. The shock on Emma's face was clear. "What do you mean?" she asked. Hesitantly. James stood up and walked to the window, trying to find the right words. "Since you took this position, you've made me question everything I believed about leadership. About how things should be done. And, worse yet, you've made me question things I never wanted to think about." Emma felt her heart race. She kept her composure. "Maybe that's a good thing," James said, chuckling softly without humor. "Good. It drives me crazy." The silence that followed was heavy with tension. Emma finally broke the moment, stepping forward. "Maybe it's time you stop fighting it and start understanding what's really happening here." James turned to her, his eyes meeting hers with an intensity that made "This is hard. I want to change things. I don't know if I'm ready for it. I don't want to fight it anymore." Emma's heart raced. She kept her gaze steady. "What do you mean?" James set the report aside and stared at her. "Maybe because you make me feel like I'm losing control." The words came out before he could stop them. The shock on Emma's face was evident. "What do you mean?" she asked hesitantly. James stood up and walked. The air felt thicker. "Emma. What exactly is happening?" She didn't answer. The look they shared said more than words. That night, Emma was the last one to leave the office. As she walked down the empty hallway, she heard footsteps behind her. Turning around, she found James standing there, looking both confused and determined. "Emma. I can't keep pretending this isn't happening," he started. His voice softer than she had ever heard it. She stayed silent, waiting for him to continue. "You've changed everything. I don't know if I'm ready for it. I know I don't want to fight it anymore either." Emma's heart raced. She kept her gaze steady. "So. What do you mean? You want to do that?" James took a step closer, narrowing the space between them. "I want to stop pretending I don't care. I want to be honest about how I feel." Before Emma could respond, James surprised her with a bold gesture. He gently took her hand as if asking for permission to move forward. When she didn't pull away, he leaned in closer. "It's so hard. What I'm suggesting is best for the company." James put the report down and looked at her. "Maybe because you make me feel like I'm losing control." The words came out before he could stop them. The shock on Emma's face was clear. "What do you mean?" she asked, hesitantly. James stood up and walked slowly until their lips met. The kiss was tender, filled with unspoken emotions. It was as if all the tension between them had found release, transforming into something deeper and more genuine. When the kiss ended, Emma pulled back slightly, still holding his hand. "This changes everything." James nodded, his expression serious. "I know. I think we're ready for this change." Emma wasn't sure if he was right. She felt it was worth the risk. As Emma headed home that night, she couldn't shake the image of James's gaze from her mind. Something had shifted between them. She knew that nothing would ever be the same. "What do you mean?" Emma asked, hesitantly. Their relationship was now uncertain. The kiss had broken the barrier between them. It hadn't resolved the underlying tensions. The next day, Emma tried to focus on her responsibilities. James did the same. Both were determined not to let their feelings interfere with the company. Fate seemed to have other plans. "It's really hard. What I'm suggesting is best for the company." James put the report down and looked at her. "Maybe because you make me feel like I'm losing control." The words came out before he could stop them. The shock on Emma's face was clear. "What do you mean by that?" she asked. Hesitantly. James stood up and walked. Plans. A week after the kiss, Emma received an anonymous email with a confidential attachment. The attachment contained old documents revealing unethical practices carried out under James's direct supervision years ago. Though the actions were from the past, the fallout from a public disclosure could be devastating for him and the company. Emma felt a knot in her stomach. Confronting James would risk the trust they were building. Ignoring the documents, however, went against everything she believed in. She decided to wait for the right moment to address the issue. Meanwhile, James noticed Emma's distance. In meetings, she remained professional. Her behavior suggested she was upset. "Emma, are you okay?" he asked when they were alone in the hallway. "I'm fine," she replied, avoiding eye contact. He narrowed his eyes. Suspicious. Didn't press further. Days later, during a board meeting, shocking news broke. The documents Emma was acting strangely. It looked like she was dealing with something personal. "Emma, are you okay?" he asked when they were alone in the hallway. "I'm fine," she replied, avoiding eye contact. He looked at her suspiciously but didn't say anything more. A few days later, during a board meeting, shocking news broke. The documents Emma had received had been leaked to the press. Headlines began to circulate, accusing James of past unethical practices. The room descended into chaos, with board members demanding immediate explanations. Those who only read the comments. "Here's a little joke, type coffee in the comments. Only those who got this far will understand." Now, let's continue with the story. James was stunned. He looked around the room, trying to figure out how the confidential information had been leaked, when his eyes met Emma's. He realized that she was the one who had leaked it. He asked her in a low, accusing tone, "Was it you?" Emma, shocked by the accusation, responded immediately, "Of course not. Do you really think I would do something like that?" James was shocked. He looked around the room, trying to figure out how the secret information got out. Then he looked at Emma. "Did you do this?" he asked, sounding angry. "Of course not," Emma said. "I would never do something like this." "You knew about the documents, didn't you?" James ignored the others in the room and continued. "Emma, I know you knew about the documents. But you didn't tell anyone. Why did you do that?" Emma hesitated. "Yes. I knew about the documents. I didn't tell anyone. I didn't leak them." James shook his head, looking shocked. "You should have come to me. You let this happen. Now you want me to believe you had nothing to do with it." "James, I would risk everything like this. You knew about these documents, didn't you?" Emma, "Yes. I knew. I didn't leak them." "James, you should have come to me. You let this happen. Now you want me to believe you had nothing to do with it." Before Emma could respond, a board member interrupted. "Cooper, we need solutions, not arguments. This could ruin your reputation and the company." The meeting ended abruptly. The tension between Emma and James was far from resolved. Later, James stormed into Emma's office and slammed the door shut. His face was red with frustration. "James, you should have trusted me. Instead, you kept this hidden like a weapon." Emma stood from her chair, equally furious. "Emma, Do you really think I'd do anything to harm the company? I received the documents anonymously and was trying to figure out how to handle it without causing a disaster. And you caused. This is exactly what you were trying to avoid. He shot back, crossing his arms. Emma took a deep breath, trying to contain her anger. You know what your problem is, James. You don't trust anyone but yourself. You can't see that the people around you might actually be here to help, not just threaten your precious control. James stepped closer. His eyes met hers. You don't know what it's like to deal with all this. It's not just the company, Emma. It's my life. Emma didn't give in. Maybe it's time you stopped acting like it's all about you. The silence that followed was heavy. James finally stepped back, shaking his head. I think I made a mistake. Emma was hurt by the mixing of personal and professional matters. She crossed her arms, her chest tightening. Maybe you're right. James left her office without looking back. In the days that followed, Emma and James barely spoke. The company was in crisis. Both focused on addressing the fallout. The silence between them was unbearable. Despite her anger, Emma couldn't ignore her feelings. Even after their confrontation, she knew there was something real between them. James, his part, was torn. He didn't want to admit it. He missed Emma's presence, even amid the chaos. As the investigation into the leak continued, they discovered a long-time executive and close friend of James's had been responsible for sending the documents to the press. He had done it to weaken James and take over as CEO. When the truth came out, James felt a mix of relief and guilt. He knew he owed Emma an apology. He wasn't sure how to approach her. One evening, James appeared at her office. Emma's office. Looking clearly uncomfortable. Emma found out who leaked the documents. It wasn't you, he added. Regretful. She didn't respond, waiting for him to continue. I was wrong to doubt your loyalty. Emma remained calm. You doubted me because you've never seen me as an equal. You've always thought you were better than me. James. That needs to change. He nodded, agreeing with her. You're right. I want to change that if you'll give me the chance. Emma studied him for a long moment before replying. I'll think about it. Though the wounds were still fresh, both knew that conversation was an important step toward fixing what was broken. As Emma watched him leave, she realized that James seemed ready to change for the first time. A week after their argument, Emma and James barely spoke, busy with their responsibilities and the impact of what had happened. They were still at odds. Then they had a chance to make up. A fancy event was planned for the top partners and investors of Cooper International. It was a fancy evening in a beautiful garden with soft lights hanging from the trees and classical music playing. Emma arrived alone, wearing a long black dress that made her look elegant and confident. Her hair was tied back into a neat bun. She had a slight smile on her lips that made everyone look at her as soon as she walked in. James, who was already at the event greeting guests, turned when he heard the murmurs of. He admired her from the moment he saw her. When he saw Emma, he was amazed. She looked different that night. Almost unreal. He was captivated by her beauty. Also by the strength and determination that seemed to radiate from her presence. He watched her interact with the guests, laughing and speaking naturally. Her magnetism was impossible to ignore. The first time, James felt vulnerable in front of someone. At the same time, he knew he needed to talk to her. After a few hours of watching Emma from a distance, James decided to approach her. He found her by a table, talking to a group of investors. As he arrived, the group politely they spread out, making room for the CEO. "Emma, can we talk?" James asked, his voice low and serious. Emma hesitated. Her eyes conveyed that she knew this moment was inevitable. "Sure," James said, leading her outside the hall to a small garden lit by fairy lights and candles. The trees swayed gently in the wind. The distant sound of music filled the air. The CEO and Emma were in a park. "Can we talk?" he asked. He sounded serious. Emma hesitated. Her eyes showed that she knew this moment was inevitable. "Sure," James said. He led her outside. They went to a small garden lit by fairy lights and candles. The trees swayed gently in the wind. The distant sound of music created an almost magical atmosphere. When they stopped under an arch decorated with flowers, James turned to her, clearly nervous. "You look beautiful tonight, Emma," he said. The words came out before he could think. Emma smiled slightly but kept her composure. "Thank you, James. I'm sure you didn't bring me here just to compliment me." They created a magical atmosphere. When they stopped under an archway with flowers, James turned to her, clearly nervous. "You look beautiful tonight," Emma said. The words came out before he could think. "Thank you," Emma said, smiling slightly. She kept her composure. "But I'm sure you didn't bring me here just to compliment me." He laughed, shaking his head. "No. It wasn't just that. I've been thinking a lot about everything that's happened between us. About how things got out of control." Emma crossed her arms, waiting for him to continue. "I was an idiot," he said. "Doubting you was my biggest mistake. But what bothers me most isn't just that." He stepped closer. James laughed, shaking his head. "No. It wasn't just that. I've been thinking a lot about everything that's happened between us. About how things got out of control." Emma crossed her arms, waiting for him to continue. "I was an idiot. Doubting you was my biggest mistake. But what bothers me most isn't just that. It's the fact that since the moment I met you, you've been changing the way I see the world. And honestly, that scares me." Emma blinked, surprised by his honesty. A moment. She was speechless. "James," she began. He interrupted. "No. Let me finish. You make me want to be a better person, Emma. I don't know what to do with. Ever since I met you, you've been changing the way I see the world. Honestly, that scares me." Emma blinked, surprised by his honesty. She was speechless for a moment. Then she began, "James. Please let me finish." "No. Let me finish. You make me want to be a better person. And I don't know what to do with that. Except to say that I need you in every way." Before Emma could respond, James leaned in and kissed her again. This time the kiss was deeper and more sincere. He held her face gently, as if afraid to break the moment. Emma kissed him back, feeling a mix of emotions she couldn't describe. "Since I met you, you've changed how I see the world. That scares me." Emma blinked, surprised by his honesty. She was speechless for a moment. Then she began, "James. Please finish what you're saying. No. Let me finish. You make me want to be a better person. And I don't know what to do with. When the kiss ended, they stood in silence, breathing slowly as the stars shone above them. Before they could say anything, an assistant hurriedly approached Mr. Cooper. I'm sorry to interrupt. There's something urgent that needs your attention. James sighed, reluctant but knowing he had to handle the situation. He looked at Emma. Since I met you, you've changed how I see the world. That scares me. Emma blinked, surprised by his honesty. She was speechless for a moment. Then she began. He interrupted. No. Let me finish. You make me want to be a better person. Emma nodded. His eyes filled with emotion he couldn't hide. Don't go anywhere. I'll be back as soon as I can. Emma nodded, watching as he walked away. She stayed in the garden, trying to process everything that had happened. 10 minutes later, James returned. Something in his expression had changed. He looked worried, almost tense. What? You've been changing the way I see the world since we met. That scares me. Emma blinked, surprised by his honesty. She was speechless for a moment. Then she began. He interrupted. No. Let me finish. You make me want to be a better person. And I don't know what to do with. Emma asked immediately, her voice alert. I just got some information, he said, his voice lower. One of the investors is trying to take advantage of the recent crisis. He plans to acquire a significant portion of the company's shares to influence the board against me. Emma frowned. Oh. James hesitated before answering. Oliver Hayes. Emma was shocked. Oliver had always shown support for her and the changes she proposed. Knowing he was acting behind the scenes felt like a blow. That makes sense. She finally said. He's always been strategic. I never imagined he'd act against you like this. James ran a hand through his hair, clearly frustrated. I don't know how you've changed how I see the world. Emma touched James's arm to get his attention. I'm not sure how to handle this. We'll handle it together. In the days that followed, Emma and James worked together to stop Oliver. They got support from other people on the board and shared a plan that saved James's job, strengthened the company amidst the crisis. During this time, their relationship became more solid. Although there were still challenges, both knew they were stronger together than apart. That night, after another successful meeting with the board, James walked Emma to her office door. Before letting her go in, he held her hand and said, "Whatever happens, I don't want to lose what we have." Emma smiled, feeling that for the first time, James was being completely honest. One morning, while Emma was reviewing reports in her office, she received a message from James. I need you with me tonight. Prepare for something special. James. She was intrigued. James, rarely I've made invitations. I'm not sure what to do. When she arrived at the restaurant, a fancy place in the city center, James was waiting for her. He was very well dressed. The place was cozy, lit by candles. What's going on? Emma asked. Sitting down. I thought we deserved a break from the charts, reports, crises. He replied, smiling. Emma relaxed a bit, though she was still curious. The evening went on pleasantly, with them sharing memories and even laughing about the tensions they had faced together. But as dinner was nearing its end, James grew serious. "Emma. We need to talk. There's something I need to tell you." He started speaking, acting like the moment was important. She leaned in slightly, waiting to hear what it was. James took a deep breath before continuing. "I've been invited to join an international company. It's a huge opportunity. It's not free. It means leaving Cooper International for at least a year to lead the negotiations and integration." Emma felt her heart tighten. "And you want to accept?" "It's not about what I want. It's something that could save the company and ensure its stability in the future." Emma knew James was right. The idea of him leaving was painful. Despite all the difficulties they had faced together, the thought of moving forward without him was scary. "Does this mean we won't have this?" she asked, her voice quivering slightly. James, still hesitant, reached out and held her hand. "I don't know what it will look like. I want you to know this doesn't change what I feel for you," he said, his voice still trembling slightly. The next morning, as Emma processed what had happened, she received another surprise. Oliver Hayes had called for an emergency board meeting. He was presenting a proposal to take over James's position during his absence. A clear strategic move to increase his power. Emma arrived at the meeting room determined to protect the legacy she had built alongside James. During the meeting, Oliver made indirect criticisms of the current leadership, suggesting it was time for a more modern and bold vision. "With all due respect, Mr. Hayes," Emma said, interrupting, "your bold vision seems to ignore the values we're trying to rebuild. This company needs consistency and integrity, not power games." Oliver smiled. Irritation flickered in his eyes. "Who should take that position in James' absence?" "Yourself." The room fell silent. Emma knew she had a choice to make in that moment. She stood, keeping her gaze fixed on Oliver. "If necessary. Yes. I'll step up." After the meeting, Emma met with James in his office. He had already heard about the board discussion. "Did you really say you'd take over the company?" he asked, his tone a mix of surprise and admiration. "I won't let Oliver turn this place into chaos. We've worked too hard to build something solid. I won't let him tear it down." Emma replied, determined. James took her hands and said, "This means more pressure and more challenges. I know it's worth it." He looked at her for a long moment before speaking. "You're incredible," he said. "You know that," Emma replied, smiling. "I'm just trying to do the right thing." The night before the board's final decision, James invited Emma to meet him again. This time, he took her to a secluded pier where a yacht awaited them. "I thought we could use some fresh air before making big decisions," he said as the boat gently glided across the water under the starry sky. As they talked, James suddenly stopped and turned to Emma. "Emma. I have something to ask you before I leave." She waited, confused, as he took out a small object from his pocket. "I know things between us started to get complicated. You've made me see the world differently. I don't want to lose that. I want you by my side no matter where I am." Emma looked at the ring in his hand. Her heart was beating quickly. "Are you proposing?" "Yes." "Emma. Will you stay with me? Not just at the company. In life?" Emma was speechless. The smile on her face gave her answer. "Yes. James." As the waves gently lapped, the two of them were ready to face anything together. even if it meant facing the boat. After James surprised her with a proposal, Emma felt like her life was spinning. She said yes, because she was feeling the emotions. Then reality set in. James was going to leave the company for a year. Emma was feeling the pressure from the board. Their promise to stay together felt more fragile than ever. The next day, Emma went back to the office to deal with new challenges. Leaks continued to fuel media rumors. Oliver Hayes was relentless in undermining her. Despite this, she was determined to show that she could lead Cooper International while James was gone. Emma met with Oliver first that day. Oliver, who was sitting in the center of the room, immediately started to question Emma's plan. He spoke in a way that made her feel like he was better than her. With all due respect, Ms. Taylor, I think your approach is too hopeful. We need to be realistic because we're facing a difficult situation. Maybe we need someone with more experience to deal with the investors. Emma, ready to defend herself, replied calmly. Optimism isn't the problem, Mr. Hayes. The problem is that we don't have a clear commitment to a long-term plan. Term vision. Investors want results. That's what I'm offering. Oliver had a secret. He passed a folder to Emma. Then, could you explain why some of your recent projects are over budget? That doesn't inspire confidence. Emma opened the folder, finding numbers that didn't match the reports. It was a planned, dishonest move. These numbers are wrong, she said, looking directly at Oliver. If someone is trying to change the data, they'd better reconsider before this goes public. The tension in the room was clear. Oliver didn't respond. The look on his face made it clear he wasn't giving up. While Emma struggled with the board, James made his own decisions. He was busy with endless meetings with the merger team. His thoughts often went to Emma. He knew she was under a lot of pressure. Leaving the company now could be a mistake. Determined to support her, James unexpectedly returned to the office at the end of the day. When he entered Emma's office, he found her buried under piles of papers. Clearly exhausted. That I thought you'd take some time off today, he said. Crossing his arms, Emma looked up, surprised but relieved to see him. That I can't rest while Oliver keeps trying to. He's playing dirty. Oliver's trying to shake me up. I won't let him. James stepped closer and took her hand. That you're not in this alone. That I'm here to make sure he doesn't cross the line, she sighed, feeling some of the weight lift. Thank you. I can't rely on you for everything. If I want to lead, I need to face this on my own. James smiled slightly, admiring her strength. You already are. You're doing it better than anyone could have imagined. That evening, James invited Emma to dinner. Hoping to distract her from work tensions, that he chose a quiet restaurant where they could talk without interruption. Their conversation soon turned personal. Have you ever thought about where we'd be in a different situation if that night at the gala hadn't happened? He asked playfully. Emma laughed and shook her head. We'd probably still hate each other. Pretend to hate each other, James corrected with a teasing smile. Their light-hearted moment was interrupted when Emma's phone rang. She hesitated, seeing it was a trusted number. She answered. We'd be now if that night at the gala hadn't happened, he asked playfully. Emma laughed, shaking her head. We'd probably still hate each other. Pretend to hate each other, James corrected with a teasing smile. Their light-hearted moment was interrupted when Emma's phone rang. She hesitated, seeing it was a trusted executive. She decided to answer. Emma, you need to get back to the office. Something urgent has come up. She looked at James, concerned. Looks like our break is over. When they arrived at the office, Emma discovered more documents had been leaked. This time outlining internal plans for the company's future. The media had already picked up on it. We'd probably still hate each other if that night at the gala hadn't happened. He teased. Or pretending to hate each other. James corrected with a playful smile. Their light-hearted moment was interrupted when Emma's phone rang. She hesitated. Seeing it was a trusted investor. She realized she had to act. Reviewing the documents. Emma realized the leaks were designed to undermine confidence in her leadership. James, seeing the papers, suspected Oliver immediately. This is his doing, James said firmly. He's trying to destroy you and consolidate control on the board. Emma took a deep breath, trying to stay composed. Then we need to act before he succeeds. Emma and James spent the night analyzing the data and strategizing how to expose Oliver. They decided to gather evidence directly linking the leaks to him, knowing it would take time and patience. As they worked side by side, their connection deepened. Despite the chaos, they found solace in each other. Emma, do you realize you're handling this better than I ever could? James said. Pausing to look at her, she glanced at him. Surprised that I never thought I'd hear that from you. That he smiled. You amaze me every day. By dawn. Emma finally found the proof she needed, a series of emails from Oliver to a journalist detailing the leaked documents and outlining his next moves. She turned to James. Holding the papers. That we've got him, James smiled. Pride and admiration in his eyes. That I knew you would. Emma knew the battle was far from over. For the first time, she felt they had a real advantage now. It was only a matter of time before Oliver was exposed. The office was silent as Emma and James reviewed the emails that linked Oliver directly to the leaks. Each email reinforced the suspicion that he had manipulated data and information to discredit them. The feeling of relief was brief, as they both knew revealing this would be a dangerous game. Oliver was an influential man. Any mistake could have serious consequences. James crossed his arms and looked at Emma, who was examining every detail intently. He knew she was facing a great challenge. He also saw that her determination was unwavering. This made him admire her even more. Still, there was a shadow of concern in his eyes. If we expose this the wrong way, he'll retaliate, James said, breaking the silence. We need something more solid. Something that will prevent him from defending himself. Emma looked up from the computer, her fingers still hovering over the keyboard. There was a glint of resolution in her eyes. Then we'd be in trouble if that night at the gala hadn't happened. He asked playfully. We'd probably still hate each other. Pretend to hate each other. James corrected with a teasing smile. Their light-hearted moment was interrupted when Emma's phone rang. She hesitated. Seeing it was a trusted. We can't face Oliver alone. We need to gather the people who know what he's capable of and show them the impact of his actions on the company. James nodded, impressed by her clarity. The plan made sense. He knew this would put them both in a vulnerable position. Trust in the board was already shaken. We'd be in this situation if that night at the gala hadn't happened. He asked playfully. We'd probably still hate each other. Be pretending to hate each other. James corrected with a teasing smile. Their light-hearted moment was interrupted when Emma's phone rang. She hesitated. Seeing it was a trusted ally met. She relied on people who had remained neutral until now. They spent the next few hours organizing the emails and creating a detailed dossier to present to the board. The clock was nearing midnight when Emma finally closed the last document. James watched her from across the room. silent as if weighing the burden. "We'd be now if that night at the gala hadn't happened?" he asked playfully. Emma laughed, shaking her head. "We'd probably still hate each other." "Pretend to hate each other," James corrected with a teasing smile. Their light-hearted moment was interrupted when Emma's phone rang. She hesitated, seeing it was a trusted number. She was carrying it. "You should rest," he said, approaching her. Emma smiled. "Tired but determined. I can't rest while he's still out there." James gently held her face, forcing her to look directly at him. "You don't have to carry this alone, Emma. We're in this together. Remember." She felt the sincerity in his words and nodded slightly. It was strange for her to accept help. She felt safe with James, even in the middle of chaos. The next morning, Emma and James arrived at the office before any other executives. They called an emergency meeting with the board members who were still undecided about the leadership. When the group finally gathered, Emma took the lead, holding the dossier firmly. "Thank you for coming so early. What I have to say isn't easy. It's necessary." She began, her voice steady. She presented the evidence directly, showing how Oliver had used internal information to manipulate decisions and undermine confidence in James's leadership. The board, everyone was quiet and focused on what was being said. It was clear that Oliver's actions were bad for the company and also put everyone's jobs at risk. When Emma finished talking, one of the senior board members, Robert McCain, cleared his throat. "This is very serious. We need to confirm that the evidence is real before we do anything." James spoke up, sounding like a leader. "I've personally checked all the information. If we're not sure, we can bring in experts from outside the company. That doesn't change the fact that Oliver did something wrong against the company and all of us." People had different reactions. Some members disagreed right away, while others he seemed unsure and uncomfortable with the idea of talking to Oliver face to face. At that moment, Emma decided to use her last argument. "I know this may be hard to accept. Ignoring these actions makes us guilty. If we want to lead with integrity, we need to act now." The effect of Emma's words was clear. She hesitated, clearly uncomfortable with the idea of confronting Oliver directly. It was then that Emma decided to play her last card. "I know this may be hard to accept. Turning a blind eye to these actions makes us complicit. If we want to lead with integrity, we need to act now." The impact of Emma's words was palpable. One by one, the board members began to express support for the plan to expose Oliver. Only one or two still seemed hesitant. The majority were on Emma and James' side. As the meeting concluded, Emma felt a mix of relief and tension. She knew they had taken an important step. The battle was far from won. James stayed by her side as the board members left and when the room was empty. He finally spoke. "You were brilliant." Emma sighed. "I hope it's enough." James moved closer, holding her hands. "It was more than enough. You're leading this in a way few could." She looked into his eyes, seeing the genuine pride in his expression. For a moment, she forgot the tension. As the board members left, he finally spoke. "You were brilliant." Emma sighed. "I hope it's enough." James moved closer, holding her hands. "It was more than enough. You're leading this in a way few could." She looked into his eyes, seeing the genuine pride in his expression. A moment, She forgot the tension. She felt grateful to have him by her side. That night, while Emma reviewed the next steps at home, she received a text from James. Whatever happens, you've proven you're more than capable. Never doubt that. James. Emma smiled at the phone, feeling more confident than ever. She knew the final confrontation with Oliver was as the board members left. Emma Taylor was finally able to speak. You were brilliant. She sighed. I hope it's enough. James moved closer, holding her hands. It was more than enough. You're leading this in a way few could. She looked into his eyes, seeing the genuine pride in his expression. A moment. She forgot the still to come. He wouldn't be an easy opponent. The Cooper International boardroom was packed. The silence was deafening. Emma Taylor stood in the center, holding the dossier containing the evidence against Oliver Hayes. James was beside her, his eyes fixed on Oliver, who seemed relaxed in his leather chair, as if certain that what was coming wouldn't touch him. Emma took a deep breath before starting. Her voice, though calm, carried an authority that made everyone lean in slightly to hear her. In the past few weeks, Cooper International has faced internal challenges that threatened its integrity and leadership. Today, I present evidence that these threats didn't come from outside. From someone inside this room. She opened the dossier and began projecting the documents on the screen, the emails, the changes in financial reports, the leaks of confidential information. Everything was there. Directly connected Oliver Hayes. The tension in the room grew with each new piece of evidence presented. Oliver, the first time, lost his confident smile that he tried to maintain his composure. His expression revealed growing discomfort when Emma finished. A heavy silence hung in the air. This is absurd, Oliver said, standing up. These documents were clearly manipulated. There's no concrete proof that I did anything wrong. James leaned on the table, his eyes locked on Oliver. Manipulated. We have digital records confirming the authenticity of these documents. This isn't just a matter of opinion, Oliver. It's a fact. Oliver laughed. His voice wavered slightly. What are you going to do? Kick me out without a proper? As the board members left, Emma finally spoke. You were brilliant. She sighed. I hope it's enough. James moved closer, holding her hands. It was more than enough. You're leading this in a way few could. She looked into his eyes, seeing the genuine pride in his expression. A moment. She forgot the investigation. You need me to stabilize this company. Emma stood up, facing Oliver directly. We don't need someone who puts their own interests above the company. We don't need you to stabilize anything. We've already done that without you. The board members began murmuring among themselves. The balance was clearly tipping against Oliver. He looked around, seeking support. No one seemed willing to defend him. Finally, the senior board member, Robert McCain, stood up. Ladies and gentlemen, I believe the evidence speaks for itself. We should vote for the immediate removal of Oliver Hayes and forward this information to the proper authorities. The vote was unanimous. Oliver was officially removed from Cooper International. The atmosphere in the room instantly lightened, as if a heavy burden had been lifted. He left without saying a word. Gave Emma one last look, filled with resentment. Once the room emptied, Emma felt a mix of relief and exhaustion. James approached her. He held her hands and said, You did it. You saved the company. She smiled. Her eyes showed how tired she was. I didn't do it alone. I couldn't have done it without you. James smiled and leaned slightly toward her. I think we make a great team. That evening, James took Emma out for a special dinner to celebrate. He chose a rooftop restaurant overlooking the city. The restaurant was soft-lit and had a cool breeze. It was a peaceful moment after weeks of tension. Both felt the importance of not only celebrating the victory. The partnership they had built was also important. As they drank their drinks and celebrated, James held Emma's hand across the table. You know, after all this, I'm not going anywhere. Right? Emma laughed and shook her head. I thought you were determined to work on the international merger. James sighed. The merger can wait. What we have here is more important. Emma's heart beat faster. She knew how rarely James put anything above work. Hearing that from him felt like a big step in their relationship. Before she could answer, James leaned in and kissed her. He spoke softly, strongly enough to show his feelings. The first time, they both felt like they had control over their future. Months later, Cooper International was doing very well under Emma and James's leadership. The changes they made brought financial success and a new culture of honesty and cooperation. Emma continued to lead in a way that showed her strength. Also made people feel comfortable because she cared about them. James, by her side, played a more supportive role than ever. He had learned. Leadership wasn't just about control, it was also about trust and inspiration. One evening, as they worked late at the office, Emma looked at James and asked, "Do you regret staying?" James smiled and stepped closer to her. Never. He said. Staying was the best decision I've ever made. They stood in silence for a moment, simply enjoying each other's company. The months that followed were transformative for both Emma and James. Cooper International was stronger than ever. Guided by James's strategic leadership and Emma's innovative human-focused vision, the struggles of the past seemed far away now, replaced by a love that grew deeper every day. James knew his life had changed forever when Emma entered it. She not only changed his views on leadership, also showed him what it meant to open up to love. One quiet evening on the terrace of their apartment, James made a decision. Emma. He began holding her hand. Gently. From the moment I met you, you challenged everything I believed in. It was the best thing that could have happened to me. Emma smiled, surprised by the tenderness in his tone. She had expected something casual. The look in his eyes told her this was important. I can't imagine my life without you anymore. You're my partner in everything, work, life, whatever's ahead. So I want a focused vision. The struggles of the past seemed like a distant memory, replaced by a love that grew deeper every day. James knew his life had changed forever when Emma entered it. She reshaped his views on leadership and showed him what it meant to open up to love. One quiet evening on the terrace of their apartment, James made a decision. Emma. He began holding her hand. Will you marry me? He asked. You paused, pulling a small ring from his pocket. Will you marry me? Emma covered her mouth, completely surprised. Though she knew they loved each other, she hadn't expected James to propose so spontaneously. Tears filled her eyes as she nodded, yes. James. I will. He slipped the ring on her finger and kissed her as the city lights sparkled in the background, witnessing the most special moment of their lives. Focused vision. The struggles of the past seemed like a distant memory, replaced by a love that grew deeper every day. James knew his life had changed forever when Emma entered it. She reshaped his views on leadership and showed him what it meant to open up to love. One quiet evening on the terrace of their apartment, James made a decision. Emma. He began holding her hand. Moment of their lives. The wedding was planned for a few months later. A simple yet elegant ceremony that reflected their essence as a couple was held in a garden filled with white flowers under a bright blue sky. It was an intimate event with close friends, family, colleagues from the company. The atmosphere was full of joy and celebration. Emma looked stunning in a classic lace dress. He saw her beauty. James was excited to marry her. He had never thought he would find someone who was right for him. As Emma walked toward the altar, her eyes met James's. In that moment, all their problems felt worth it. Each step was meaningful. Focused vision. The struggles of the past seemed like a distant memory, replaced by a love that grew deeper every day. James knew his life had changed forever when Emma entered it. She reshaped his views on leadership and showed him what it meant to open up to love. One quiet evening on the terrace of their apartment, James made a decision. Emma. He began holding her hand. Their love had been forged through chaos and determination. At the altar, the officiant began the ceremony. For Emma and James, the world seemed to disappear. All that mattered was what they felt for each other. When exchanging vows, James's words made Emma's eyes shine. Emma. You're not just the woman I want to spend the rest of my life with. You're the reason I believe love can transform. Everything you've taught me that true strength lies in sharing. Trusting. Growing together, I promise to stand by your side through every moment. Easy or challenging, you're my home. My partner. My love. Emma smiled, a tear rolling down her cheek when it was her turn. She held James's hands firmly and said, James, you've shown me that even the most guarded hearts can open. You taught me that focused vision. The struggles of the past seemed like a distant memory, replaced by a love that grew deeper every day. James knew his life had changed forever when Emma entered it. She not only reshaped his views on leadership but also showed him what it meant to open up to love. One quiet evening on the terrace of their apartment, James made a decision. Emma. He began holding her hand. Strength isn't just about overcoming challenges, facing them alongside the one you love. I promise to love you every day of our lives, support you in all your choices, build a story worthy of what we've started together. As they exchanged rings, the guests cheered. Emma and James were oblivious to it all. When the officiant declared them husband and wife, James leaned in to kiss Emma. They promised to be together in the future, with love, trust, partnership. The reception was filled with joy. Friends and family toasted to the couple and shared funny and touching stories about their relationship. James, usually reserved, surprised everyone with a heartfelt speech. I want to thank everyone for being here today. But more than that, I want to thank Emma for transforming my life. You're the best thing that's ever happened to me. I hope everyone here finds something as special as what I've found with you. Emma. They embraced and danced under the garden lights. Their guests watched with smiles. The couple looked happy. Everyone thought they were meant to be. That night, the stars shone brightly. The last guests left. Emma and James sat alone in the garden under the moonlight. They didn't need to talk. They simply held hands. They knew that together they could face anything. Was Emma right to forgive James? Share your opinion in the comments. Rate the story from 0 to 10. What's your score? Subscribe to the channel and click the bell icon to receive notifications for new stories. Click here to see more heartwarming stories.